Talk about this first story then. This is Keir Starmer, closer ties with the EU. Is it exactly what Sunak was doing anyway? And should we be developing closer contacts with the EU if it means that we have to enshrine our laws into EU law? During a speech in Norway today, Sir Keir Starmer remained adamant the UK will not reverse Brexit, but he plans to still build a closer relationship with the EU. Let's have a listen to what Mr Starmer said this morning.
When it comes to the wider reset with Europe, I'm absolutely clear that we do want a reset. I've been able to repeat that here today, a reset with Europe, a reset with the EU. That does not mean reversing Brexit or re-entering the single market or the customs union, but it does mean a closer relationship on a number of fronts, including the economy, including defence, including exchanges.
It's interesting, Alan, he says including the economy and including defence. I mean, they are, significant parts. You can understand why some people are going, hang on a sec.
Well, yeah, and I think as well, I suppose it depends whether you think that by pursuing closer ties back with the European Union, that is at a disadvantage to developing ties with places around the world, which obviously one of the reasons why we left the European Union was to be able to develop those ties with places like America. We've just joined the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that sort of stuff. If you can do both, then I don't think people would have necessarily too much of a problem. I think the issue comes when there was a great story in the Times on Saturday, which had a kind of a shopping list of the things that the European Union wants to reopen discussions on when talks open on this kind of reset. And it was all the things that would, if you had to design a list to annoy kind of Brexiteers, it was on shipping right, on fishing rights. It was about European law, the European Court of Justice, on free movement, all those kind of things. And if you do think that Brussels are going to start to reopen discussions on those things, then I can understand why people who did vote to leave the European Union would be pretty irate about that.
Yeah, and that's I mean, it's worth having a listen here to Boris Johnson, by the way, because he of course, won that landslide in 2019, really all based on this. Yeah. Get Brexit done. He's accused the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, of threatening to throw away the freedoms that we all voted for. Let's have a listen to the former Prime Minister Johnson in action.
So if you care at all about democracy or the economic salvation of Britain, then I urge you to fight and fight again for the freedoms that people voted for in 2016 and which Keir Starmer is now threatening to throw away.
So there it is. I mean, you might say, Alan, bearing in mind everything we went through with Boris Johnson, that he's maybe not the voice to listen to these days. But nonetheless, that's typical Boris.
He could also do with getting a... Yeah, he could also do with getting a decent videographer. I'm not sure that looks... We're
thinking of running a competition if you can guess where that was filmed. I can't, for the life of me, make head and a tail of it.
Yeah, downstairs bathroom or something. It looks a bit like...
some very bizarre sort of old Eastern European backdrop there.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about it is that, you talked about that 2019 general election. At the time, Keir Starmer was Jeremy Corbyn's shadow Brexit secretary, and he was the person credited with dragging the Labour Party. And, Jeremy Corbyn was instinctive anti-European Union from kind of the other side of it, from a lot of people on the right of this country, but he was against it. And Keir Starmer was the person credited with dragging him towards a position of asking for a second referendum.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting this time round in the election in July was that Brexit was not really a factor sort of at all. But you do wonder if people like Boris Johnson with long memories about those times are thinking, well, actually, there is a way of kind of attacking Labour by focusing on the fact they think that Keir Starmer kind of secretly, despite all of his kind of let Brexit lie, that actually he does want to kind of drag us back to that kind of position. And I do wonder if perhaps those kind of old positions that he took might start to be brought to the fore if we do see kind of those kind of chinks in the armour about actually relenting on some of those kind of what we're seeing as pretty thick red lines around Brexit.
Let's move to this story, Alan. We've had two-tier care, two-tier policing. We've now got two-tier milkshakes because, according to Nigel Farage, that's what's going on here. The woman who threw a milkshake at Nigel Farage during a public appearance in 2019 has avoided jail. She pleaded guilty to criminal damage and public order offences, receiving a community order worth 120 hours of unpaid work. I'm not quite sure why she wasn't charged with assault, because I think there is an assault component within doing that. It's not a nice thing to throw a milkshake over somebody. Having spoken to Farage the first time it happened, I remember him saying to me, there is that moment where you hope it's a milkshake, but you don't genuinely know it's a milkshake. You think, good Lord, what could it be? So whatever anybody thinks of him or any other politician for that matter, it's not how we want to be doing business. It's not how we want to show our grievances against certain political views or people. But Mr Farage has criticised it as two-tier justice, bearing in mind, I think he's referring to the fact that some people were jailed, of course, for things they put on social media over the course of the riots. That's the comparison I sense Mr Farage is making.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure necessarily that it adds up. Those two things are unequal, really. But I do agree with you. I think actually that we want to stamp out things like people throwing, regardless of people's political position, throwing milkshakes over people is horrible. I've done lots of interviews with politicians who are incredibly scared for their own safety and also for kind of the kind of quality of the kind of public debate in this country, and the fact that people don't want to come into politics because of fears of this kind of violence and these kind of horrible things that happen to them. So I think you do want to see that kind of stamped out, and whether you think that actually this person should have gone to prison in order to perhaps deter others from doing it. I'm not entirely sure that short prison sentences work. We've had a lot of conversations about whether people should go to prison for this kind of stuff. I know, I agree with you. There is a kind of an assault element to it because, I think she did throw the cup and stuff as well. But whether actually those two things are, obviously inciting violence is a different thing. I think that we do need to have a longer debate about what we do want to send people to and from prison for.
I understand the anger and the comparisons and of course what happened with the riots. People were jailed against the backdrop of the riots. That's what made that very different. I'm not defending. I was speaking to a lawyer the other day who's more left-wing than an Albanian Keep Left sign, and he's got no truck and no love for anybody who was protesting in Southport. But even he said, look, some of these are really iffy prison sentences. It's a bit weird. But, the answer that always comes back, in 2011, they did the same thing for the riots then. There was a guy whose name, I think his name was Nicholas Robinson. If I've got that right, that would be a pub quiz winner for the rest of time, who was jailed for 6 months for nicking a bottle of water out of Lidl. And the reason he was because it was when people were looting and rioting, and so it's not a Keir Starmer thing. I don't know how the message gets translated to the judges, but clearly people were jailed for very specific or jailed at a very specific time because of what was happening.
Yeah, and I just think that as well, like if you're the sort of person who wants to engage in the sort of thing like milkshaking a politician, if you look at the sentence that was handed out today, if you think that you would suffer the same sentence if you were caught for doing the same thing, would that put you off? And that essentially is part of it. Is it an adequate deterrent from people who clearly want to be able to do this for political or for infamy reasons would want to do that? And I think that's where it's different, is that clearly those harsh sentences over the summer were a clear deterrent from people from continuing those actions. And is it the same today? Essentially, I think that's it. And I guess you would say that perhaps not every sentence would be the same for the same person. This person might have had no criminal record previously, and that might have been in their favour, and etc. etc. But it is, from the outside, it's not going to look necessarily like it's too much of a deterrent if you just get effectively as kind of a fine and a slap on the wrists. Yeah.
Bit of breaking news. The alleged Chinese spy has just been named as Yang Tengbo. Yang Tengbo. It might be worth having a quick flick through your contacts list, Alan, to see if he's in there. If he is, then somebody might want to have a word with you as to why. But nonetheless, that is the man everybody's been talking about. It was a bit mysterious that he could be named in China and every other country in the world apart from here. But now we know who he is.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think it was partly due to the fact that the kind of pressure from parliamentarians who knew that they would be able to use parliamentary privilege to be able to do so. I think that it was always likely this person was going to be named, because I don't think we want to get through, and certainly Lindsay Hoyle as a speaker doesn't want to get to a situation where MPs are using that parliamentary privilege to name things.
Which I think is what's happened here, right?
I think that essentially it's bowing to that kind of pressure, then knowing that the person was going to be named within the next couple of hours anyway, that there's no point holding on to it, especially, as you say, also the person it was named in China and around the world too. It's a bit farcical if it was not to happen in this country as well.
Indeed. Quick word on Yvette Cooper refusing to set a timetable for cutting dangerous small boat crossings. What I find interesting about this, of course, is that Labour seem to have a target for everything, Alan. They cannot help themselves. They've got targets where nobody ever asked for targets where there aren't even anything to place the targets on. Spreadsheets spreadsheet, love a database. Apart from this, mysteriously, which Yvette Cooper yesterday in the Koonsberg interview acknowledged that it was a very serious problem, but still won't set any kind of timeline for reducing the act. I mean, they talk about smashing the gangs, love the phrase smashing, they smash the gangs, who doesn't want to do that? But the actual problem that's happening every day and hundreds of people a week making a very dangerous journey, etc.
Yeah.
Really silence almost.
Well, as well, also in that interview, Yvette Cooper said that it was not just about slogans, but that, you know, they said they've been bashing that slogan about smashing the gangs for an awfully long time. And I think it's, I think you're right. The problem is I'm never really a fan of targets, because I think that they're a bit of a millstone, and again, people end up trying to manipulate them to reach them. But the problem is that if, as you say, if you set a target in things like NHS waiting times and education stuff, if you're not setting a target in somewhere else, then that obviously makes it seem like it's less of a priority. And as you say, both Yvette Cooper and the Migration Minister, Angela Eagle, was talking about that it is a massive priority, but it doesn't look like it from the outside if you're saying these are the deliverables, these are the things that you need to measure us on, and one of them is not a target in this sense. And I think, you know, I wouldn't necessarily want to put a target on it if I was in government. I don't think that's necessarily the best way of crafting policy and pursuing stuff, but it does look as though that they're not looking to bring it down to below a specific number, and in that case people will think that they're happy with it to continue to stay at a high level despite what they might say.
I mean, that's what you kind of extrapolate from this, that is they're quite relaxed about what is happening there, and I don't think it would be wrong to point that out, that that's clearly the impression that's being given here. Listen, Alan, always a pleasure. If we don't speak before, have a cracking Christmas. Alain Tolhurst, Chief Reporter, Politics Home, with us here on Talk. Back to you in a